Alright, so as I've said, there are 7 movies to talk about today, so let's not waste any time. We're going to start with the first one, which is Logan Lucky, where Soderbergh apparently filmed a movie, or a very large portion of a movie, at the Coca-Cola 600 NASCAR race without many people knowing about it. When you actually see it in the movie, it seems like they almost kind of did an entirely separate thing and like recreated or whatever. But to my understanding, he just kind of did it while it was in progress and got various other important shots after the fact. I'm not quite sure how that worked out, but nevertheless, he has shot a movie here before, and he was pretty much in and out of town before anybody even knew where anything was. But except they had their rap party at our bowling alley. That's about the closest in that we actually saw him. But there is another, and weirdly enough, this movie just happens to also be set in West Virginia. So going into this, I knew going in that this was supposedly Soderbergh's return to stuff like in the same vein as when he did the Ocean's movies, and then obviously it was going to have these characters from this area, and it was going to be like, well, I suppose that means it'll be more relatable to me in some way. Not necessarily I can relate to them personally, but the characters in this movie could be just like people that I've seen around and see like every day. And yeah, that does come through pretty well, particularly all the great stuff Adam Driver's doing, which was one of the main reasons I was excited to see this movie was Adam Driver's presence. But the whole thing was very interesting to me, and I wasn't quite sure how you do a heist movie with a NASCAR setting, but it does all make sense when it's all laid out for us. And it's one of those movies where it does do it in a very... everything seems super, super complicated, but they lay it out in a way to where you can get a pretty good grasp on it. I was a little afraid when I heard that Soderbergh was going back to ocean territory, the idea of... I like his Ocean's 11, but it does have a problem, and that problem is extremely apparent in like when it goes into like 12 and 13, and that is this whole aura of it's striving to be really, really cool and slick. Like there's nothing effortless about the coolness to that movie. It all feels like very, very kind of calculated coolness, and they know exactly what they're doing. But here, that's still here, but it is kind of like Soderbergh, I believe, is the one that's always quoted as saying you should never be able to see the director figuratively standing in front of the camera and waving his hands when you're watching a movie. And here I definitely get that vibe much more than, say, his Ocean's movies, because this movie has much more of an effortless way about it, which is kind of like the exact opposite of how I feel about his Ocean's movies. Especially because we've got like I said, I don't know if it's because they're like West Virginians or what it is, but the characters just seem a lot more real in this than a lot of earlier Soderbergh movies. I'll get into... he's kind of started something here with... I don't know if it's... I can't remember exactly if it started with Magic Mike, and or if there are other I'm sure it goes back, especially into his more lesser-known stuff, like King of the Hill. But the thing here is that these characters do feel like, when you just look at the very opening scene, and you see Channing Tatum working on his truck, and he's having those interactions with his daughter. And even though his daughter is kind of doing the precocious thing that we see a lot of child actors do in movies and child characters, it does feel like that they're actual people, and that's very important in this movie, that they feel as real as possible, because that's the whole motivation as to why they would need to rob a NASCAR race, or a speedway anyway. And during this, their scenes together kind of reminded me of Will Smith and Jaden Smith in The Pursuit of Happiness, which is... you don't typically mean this when you say Jaden Smith's name, but that's a compliment, because because the interactions between them in that movie were very, very real, and obviously ended up getting Will Smith an Oscar nomination. And here, I kind of got that same vibe from Channing Tatum and the girl playing his daughter, and how they actually... I was just watching the scene and I was like, wow, you would really suspect that Channing Tatum, of all people, was from West Virginia when he did this. But then I totally forgot. He went to college here, so I guess that makes sense. So, and you look at these characters and you go into, like, his brother, who is Adam Driver, and you get very real people in these. They kind of go into, they certainly go into stereotype territory, like with Joe Bang's brothers. But even when they go into stereotype territory, it's still really funny. Like, it was, like when I was talking about Tucker and Dale recently, I was talking about how it's kind of rare that people from West Virginia are shown positively. Like, and I get it. I do. But it's, but this movie does it in a way to where it actually, much like in Tucker and Dale, they do the stereotypes, but in a very funny way, because, as you can tell, I don't really fit any type of stereotype that you could see around here that I know of. So, knowing the fact that these actually feel like people that I would run into if I just walked outside, just makes it all the more funny. And like, especially in ways like Adam Driver. Adam Driver is able to kind of do that, but he does it in a very downplayed way. And he's not, like, that's not the whole character. That's just kind of like, when you first see him, you can gather pretty quickly where he's from, but then afterward, there's a lot more to him. But he's able to keep that quality in his character to make it consistently funny throughout. Mainly when it comes to, like, the deadpan deliveries and all that, and just, this whole movie's sense of humor is fantastic. But the thing about that is, you have these characters that do feel like people I could just see when I walk outside, but then you also have people thrown into the mix like Seth MacFarlane, where I did really like what they did with Seth MacFarlane here, because I was wondering like what exactly he was going to do, because I had no idea going in. And the thing that I like is, you know, Seth MacFarlane has this talent for just creating characters, just different types of personalities with different voices, different appearances, and all that stuff. And it's always weird to me if you watch something like A Million Ways to Die in the West, or that weird moment where he has one scene in the Tooth Fairy, and it's just him looking normal. Or even in Hellboy, when he voices the robot, you can still pretty much it's almost him speaking normally. So I really like in cases like this, where even if the character seems over the top in context, Seth MacFarlane is that guy that you want if you want this character that is going to take on a different appearance and a different voice, because that's just his forte, is to create different characters and not just walk around as himself in a movie. So I like that this movie took advantage of that when they cast him and decided to make a real character out of it and not just have him there. That's why I also liked his character in Sing, where he actually got to do a voice a little bit and not just speak like Brian on Family Guy, which is his real voice. And obviously there's a huge cast list on this thing. Not everybody gets, you know, an enormous moment to shine, like Catherine Waterston. I kind of forgot Catherine Waterston was in the movie until she came back at the very end. And she's an actress that typically does not do that to you. You typically remember her when you see her, but that's definitely more so the part. But it does all have kind of it does tie everything up like that. But there's also, like I said, even though Soderbergh is famous for that quote about directors, he is still able to make his movies look relatively flashy, in a nice way. Like I said, the Ocean's movies are probably a little too flashy for my liking, but then there's just different shots in this movie that just kind of stick out, like when Driver's making the drink at the beginning with just his one hand to prove a point to Seth MacFarlane, and we get all those different shots where things like backgrounds fade into the foreground and all that stuff. It's very, I mean, I know it's very basic shots, but just the way they're kind of constructed in the context of their scenes makes them stand out. And stuff like, they kind of do the same thing when Daniel Craig pulls the fake salt out of his sock. Just random shots like that that just kind of bring the movie to life visually when it's really a pretty, in a very, what could be a very simple scene and pretty much is otherwise. So I like that he's able to kind of utilize the way he shoots movies to bring these scenes that would be mundane to life just by using normal techniques, but they just add a nice flash to the scene that isn't overdone. And then what I really like, what I was talking about just now with Magic Mike, where I was talking about how the characters seem real, and how when you watch Soderbergh's movies as of late, it basically feels like people watching. This can also go back to the movie he shot here, like right here in town, was Bubble, which is just the whole mundane quality of it did get some criticism, especially from the people around here, as you can probably guess, ironically enough. But the thing here is, yeah, the movies kind of feel like people watching, and that's what I thought made the Magic Mike movies stand out so much. Like, obviously they have kind of a bad rap because they're the male stripper movies starring Channing Tatum. But you could throw Tatum into this as well, along with Soderbergh, and that is, when you watch those movies, it just basically feels like you're watching these people from a somewhat distance, and just watching real people live despite what they may be doing or how extravagant their lifestyle is, or if it's very mundane like the characters in this, whose personalities will bring them to life despite the fact that they lead mundane lives. And all of that is just handled really well and really makes the stakes nice and apparent when we get to the big heist scene, when it just gets to be this big caper movie with this the great thing about this movie is when you look at its sense of humor, you'll see familiar things. Like, there are some things there's one particular scene with Adam Driver that feels like a scene right out of Kingpin. So it's stuff that you've seen before and jokes that have been done. Like I said, a lot of the deadpan stuff, but there's also like the physical stuff. Weirdly enough, the movie's set in West Virginia where I live. I was actually in a theater in Ohio when I saw this, and I was laughing all the way home at when they put the canister in and it comes back. Stuff like that. But like I said, even though it seems like you've probably seen variations of it in other movies, maybe in particular heist movies, heist comedies anyway, that's still within the context, the sense of humor still feels like unique to the movie. Like, the humor specifically fits these characters, and like it feels like it maybe wouldn't in any other background with any other scenario or whatever. Like the gummy bear bomb thing is a comedic moment that feels like it would not happen to anybody else but Joe Bang. The same thing with Adam Driver's character, even though, like I said, even though it feels like a scene right out of Kingpin, I just kind of immediately think, of course that would happen to him. Like, so I thought that was really, really well done as well. And it's like, and going on that, yeah, just to mention, a huge point for this movie is it's hilarious. Whether it's in big ways, like when the heist happens, or in just really small ways, like the way a line is delivered, or when they put the fire out. And then there's just moments that almost feel like Coen Brothers, like the bear in the woods. That's never explained. It doesn't need to be. Nor the fact that he vanishes into thin air. It's like, you just see that. I just imagine this happening in an editing room, and Soderbergh's just laughing his ass off. And because it makes Soderbergh laugh, that's why it's in the movie. Kind of like the whole introducing joke. When it says introducing Daniel Craig as Joe Bang in the credits, just like it did introducing Julia Roberts in the Ocean's 11 credits. And it's like, why is that in there? Probably because it makes Soderbergh laugh. And that's it. That's the only reason it has. There's also the whole thing about the screenwriter Rebecca Blunt, and how there's apparently a good chance that she's not a real person. I don't know. It's just stuff like that feels like this very unique to Soderbergh sense of humor that really shines through in the movie and really makes the characters and the scenarios feel really unique to this movie. And there are also moments like, obviously in movies like this, like these caper movies or whatever, you tend to want to pay close attention because you don't know when a character is gonna, do something slick or do something that may have a payoff later, or something that just really slips by the audience. Because that's their whole job, is to just do this in and out without being seen or getting caught. And there's some stuff in this movie where it probably feels a lot like the characters may be taking a lot of leaps of faith, which is probably true, but at the same time, it does kind of have, it does give that more classic caper feel when you kind of have the moments where you're like, I don't know if that's how that would play out, but it just, it fits the tone of the movie enough that you just go along with it and you buy it. Like, even moments where it feels like we're just living in the characters and enjoying their presence can come back, like, even if it's, like, if it seems to have no point except for that. And one of the scene that really stands out is the scene where Elihu and David Denman are talking about his car and the whole whether he can or cannot drive stick, and you're like, well, I wonder what the point of that scene was. And then sure enough, they're just kind of planting seeds, just little tiny seeds throughout the whole movie, and it all kind of comes back, and in that way to where obviously it tends to annoy me because it's so overdone, but these movies will often have that moment, the Ocean's movies for instance, or that Now You See Me bullshit, where they'll show you a whole scenario and then they'll basically play it back to you playing the fast music, and they'll show you how it was really done, and they'll just bask in their own cleverness. But here it works. Number one, they're not playing the usual jazzy music. It's Fortunate Son this time. And secondly, it actually, like, there were moments in the movie where I wanted to know how they did stuff and how they pulled it off and why this particular thing happened and how it got to that. When usually in these movies I'm just so sick and tired of these cliches that it's just like, yeah, I know, we're going to get the whole, oh, this is how this happened, and I'm usually not caring how they do it or how they got to where they did, but this time I actually did. And there are other cliches in there that they make work, like the age-old one where the dad misses the pageant, and the dad promises he's going to be there for the next one, and there's going to be that moment where at the very last minute he's in the back, he's standing in the doorway, and he's there on time, and it's like, even that old cliche is like, it's done in such a, I mean, it's a very movie-like scene in the movie, but there's just such a sincerity in its heart that it works in context. So I thought that was handled really well. And obviously a lot of this wouldn't work if it weren't for the presence of Channing Tatum, who's clearly the driving force throughout the movie, and he's getting real good. Like, I know people gave him a hard time for a long time, and I know he'll still be the Magic Mike guy or the step-up guy to a lot of people. But as an actor, he's really growing into something, and here he just, like I said, has that this guy who's, like, known for his, like, perfect, chiseled, unrealistic image, and yet he's able to play these real people so naturally, and he really has that way about him when he's in those characters, and there's, like, and we see this guy just kind of getting walked all over from the get-go, like, getting fired for, like, a technical reason, and then the women at the salon kind of bossing him around, and then Katie Holmes obviously just tries to walk all over him, and we see this guy beating him down enough, but not enough to where obviously Channing Tatum's not going to play like some square that lets me walk over him. He does kind of try to fight his battles, but he's still in a very sympathetic position when he makes the decision to do what he does and what he constructs. And that's really, it's such a character-driven movie for the kind of, you know, fun comedy that it is. And yeah, so it just kind of all comes together. And like I said, its sense of humor too is just such a, like I said, the way they kind of mix up with the stereotypes and still make it funny. I like when one of Joe Bag's brothers says dramastically instead of dramatically. So yes, I thought it worked pretty much on all those fronts, and it might feel a little long. It might feel like it has a few endings, because the thing is I thought we were kind of getting close to an ending, but then I was able to forgive that it kept going, because it was like, oh yeah, I totally forgot Hilary Swank was supposed to be in this. And so it's like, once she came in, I was like, oh, if she just got here, we probably still got a little bit to go. So then from then on, I was okay, but I feel like people who don't kind of know where the structure is going might think it's going to feel really long, but once I figured out what was going on and what kind of exactly how the movie was built and what exactly the direction our third act was going to go, then that was fine. So yeah, there's really a lot to like about this. I think Soderbergh goes back and forth for sure between how mainstream audiences will take to his movies. Like there's stuff there's stuff where he just goes way off, like Grey's Anatomy, where he just goes full documentary. But then there's stuff, his earlier stuff, there's stuff like Schizopolis too, which is really, really out there. I'm like one of the few people I know that not only has seen it but likes it too. I just thought that was a crazy ass movie, and I loved it for it. But then, when he did The Oceans, he got really Out of Sight is a pretty mainstream movie. And then, of course, he does Magic Mike. And with Magic Mike, he basically made an art house movie disguised as this women-only movie that guys turn their noses up at because dudes are taking their clothes off. But it's this really character-driven thing that's, like, really fantastic. And so he really goes in interesting directions. I imagine when audiences see his name, they're not quite sure what they're in for if they're familiar with him. There's obviously his really experimental phase. Like, you could throw Bubble in there as well as The Girlfriend Experience. Obviously not all of these land, but when they do, they're just fantastic. But yeah, I do think mainstream audiences will take to this for sure. Obviously much more so than, say, his more experimental stuff. So, yeah. I think that's about what that is. The second movie is going to be Annabelle Creation. Before I go into the movie itself, I should probably talk about the experience I had, which kind of obviously enhanced the experience, so that may have helped. It didn't hurt, it might have helped, actually. For starters, well, yeah, it was a huge inconvenience for a while, but the thing here is, I go in there, and it was in the afternoon on Wednesday, and we're in the second biggest auditorium, and it's the stadium seating, and it looks big. I'm the only one in there. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna watch Annabelle Creation in a giant room alone in the dark. Let's see how this goes. And it's gone, and it's, creeping me out. It's effective, it's doing its thing, it's working its magic. And then about an hour and 10 minutes in, and it's about an hour 50 in total, the projector goes out, and the fire alarm goes off. And it takes me about 10 seconds to realize that this is not in the movie. I see the lights flashing over here. So I have to I sit in the back, so I have to walk all the way down the steps, wondering if the building is burning down behind me. There's nobody else, there's no other reactions in the room to play off of, or to take guide in. I'm the only one here, so it's a good thing I didn't take the exit at the front. So all of us that were in movies are gathered in the lobby, and it turns out that the wires were messed up. And so the alarm just went off by itself. Like all the dudes, like the fire people and all that had to come because of protocol and all that, and then we had to wait for them to start the movies back up. And then when the movie starts back up, number one, the alarm went off again for just a second, even though the projector stayed on. And then I don't know if they were working on something or what it was, but I could swear, because I'm in the back row of stadium seating, the ceiling is pretty much right here, and I am pretty sure people are walking up there. So while Annabelle is continuing, I'm just hearing footsteps up fucking above me. And then, to top it all off, I believe when it came back, the volume was like 3 times higher. And for a movie like Annabelle, you can tell when the volume is really high up. To the point that even when the score was in neutral, the floor was rumbling. But it enhanced it enough that I just rolled with it, and I finished the movie out that way. So needless to say, it was almost like a 4D experience. So now, and that's all of that before even the movie itself. The movie itself has a very nice opening scene when we see Anthony LaPaglia making the doll that we all know. And this opening really, for starters, it makes you feel like the director here, who is the guy that did Lights Out, there was something he was able to capture. He did this, he handled Lights Out really well too. He's one of those directors where I feel like he's trying to, like this guy is going to make something really special. Somewhere in this future, this guy is going to make a horror movie that is just out of this world. But with Lights Out and now Annabelle Creation, you can tell this guy is like... These movies are like 75% him, 25% studio. You can tell when it's him, and you can tell when it's the studio. That's how good this guy is. And the thing here is, when he makes this scene, this opening scene, you think back to Annabelle from 2014, the movie that this is a prequel to. And obviously that movie is just fucking garbage. And it's very... I don't even remember if it was PG-13 or R, but it has the feel of a shitty PG-13 horror movie. And luckily I remember the opening. Because otherwise I would have been a little lost, but thankfully. But the thing here is... that movie just completely went off. Like, they made The Conjuring, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna make a spin-off with Annabelle, and then we're gonna do The Conjuring 2. And it's like, when you see The Conjuring in the second one, and then you see Annabelle, it does not feel like the same universe. It feels like Annabelle is a shitty knockoff that was gonna have its own thing go off and fail. But when Annabelle Creation begins, and we see this opening scene from the very first time, it feels like a Conjuring movie. And it sticks throughout the entire movie. If they had called this The Conjuring 3, I wouldn't have argued with them. It's like, it's kind of like how Captain America Civil War might as well be the Avengers 3. That's basically how it goes. And it really helps making this effective universe. And the thing about his direction is, you could say he's accomplishing this by copying James Wan. But it doesn't feel like that. You can tell this is another director's work, but it's similar enough to where he set it just right to where it all feels like it's in the same universe and we're all coming together here. But you can tell it's somebody's own vision too. He really had to kind of find the ground there, and he was able to pull that off. And there are moments like, when they first get to the Mullins' house, and we get the same shots we get in both Conjuring movies, where we're introduced to the layout, so we know where we are when shit's going down. And so it's just kind of one shot that takes us on a tour as everybody's exploring. And it's like, it's a nice introduction, and like I said, it doesn't feel like he's just copying one. It just feels like he's setting up the universe here, and that's really well done to be able to pull that off without looking like you're just doing another knockoff, like, say, the first Annabelle. And the way he does it in this way, especially this opening scene, particularly the opening scene, it really sets this nice mood, because bad horror movies are in a really big damn hurry to get to their scares. And while you could say there is maybe a moment here, like when LaPaglia finds her when they're playing an innocent game of hide-and-seek that may or may not be like a slight homage to the Clap game, where she just leaves him little notes. It's almost like they're playing hot and cold, where he like jumps out and grabs her, but there's no score there or anything, and the movie's not in a hurry to get to those big giant moments. So there's like a it doesn't feel like overly sinister when it begins, but it doesn't feel overly innocent either. Like, obviously when it really builds up the innocence of it, it's like you're just waiting for the bad thing to happen. But its thing here is this game of hide and seek, and then them going to church afterwards. It's all got, like, there's nothing wrong here that's an innocent thing, but they still play it up. Like, the way it's shot, it still has this ominous thing kind of lurking, to where they're not going to the extreme one or the other. It's the movie kind of setting this middle tone to where, you know, you're not too comfortable, but you're not too uneasy either. But you know where the story's going to be going. And I thought it was just the whole opening was really nicely handled in that way. And obviously we don't even get the title of the movie until the tragedy strikes that sets everything off. Which, once again, is not done in some big, over-the-top way like it could have. But it does drastically say, from here on out, we're in the shit now. So, and then, obviously, we cut forward 12 years. Apparently 12 years is the thing. I don't know. Maybe Solomon Northup wrote this or something. Or Richard Linklater, even. But, But going on here, it is another one of those cases where it does... Obviously, there's going to be a lot of jump scenes. I guess you can't really get around that unless you're like... Well, no, I would say an A24 horror movie, but no, even they do it. Everybody, It Follows. It Follows is constantly getting praised for, there's no jump scares in it. Yeah, I remember that fucking ball against the window for no reason. Bullshit. There are jump scares in It Follows, too. But they choose their moments wisely. Every now and then there is a moment here, but the thing I noticed was when there's the fake-out scares, like when LaPaglia finds her when they're playing hide-and-seek, they don't do the score thing. It's just because somebody's there, or it's when, when somebody's she's in the room and it's all silent, and then the girl comes around the corner and, says something to her and it freaks her out. The whole loud noise, the score will make you jump thing, is only when there's actually a threat there. Or there's actually something that's making a big deal. And sometimes even for those moments, they don't. What I really liked was the moment, and once again, this is a moment that could have been really silly. Kind of like you see the criticism that a ghost story is currently getting, that kind of thing, where, and it's also something they did in Paranormal Activity 3, which I thought was kind of creepy in that sense, too, but this moment that just really sent a chill up my spine, the closet thing with the sheet, when it stands up. And there's no indication in the soundtrack or, any sound department whatsoever. It's just doing its thing in total silence, and that's what it is. I think I don't know, was there a chord? I don't remember a chord being struck when it happened, or if there's some, big drastic thing, but it felt very much like it was its own natural scare without without them cheating. It felt like the scare earned itself. Without, the sound department having to intervene. And there are quite a few moments that stick out like that, especially this series in general is just really good about those when they're on. But then you have stuff like, there's this, obviously one of the other gigantic jump scenes is the whole under the blanket thing. For a while there, that under the blanket scene felt like something out of Suspiria. And then obviously there's that moment where we have the big jump when they see the woman under the covers. But the great thing about that is the creepy vibe they set up right before that, where they build up that somewhere in this 12 years something happened to Miranda Otto, and now she's in bed shrouded by curtains, and she's got like an eyes without a face thing going on. And that's just kind of a creepy vibe in general to this character that was so, innocent in the opening, and now something has happened to make this character terrifying, and she's hiding in the shadows. And so this thing that we know this character is just a mother that lost a child, and then something horrible happened to her. But the way she's just shrouded in this creepy way makes all the girls see her as something like a campfire story. And the way they kind of play on that, and the way that built us into what the big scare is. I'm assuming that's some kind of symbolic thing, given what they were talking about and the fact that this, or maybe this woman comes in somewhere else, I don't know, but yeah, there is stuff like that, but then there's stuff like I'd say we can probably all agree that Your Soul thing is goofy as hell. And that's one of those more, cheap things. That scene would have been in the first Annabelle, which, as we've said, is not a compliment. But another thing that really works here, as I was just talking about with Logan Lucky, is this is one of those kind of rare modern-day horror movies where the characters matter. The characters actually kind of... how much it's built up to care about them has a lot of impact on when the scares come later. There is, I don't want to go into too much, but there's obviously, well, I'm a week late on this, so I'm sure you all probably know already, but that was some fucking crazy shit in the last 10 minutes or so, involving a character. But then there's also, there's LaPaglia's character, who is very... he has that quality to him in the opening scenes where he has that, fatherly warmth, but he's got a bit of sternness, and then that comes through more after the time jump, when he's just kind of watching the girl silently, where he still kind of has that sternness, but kind of that warmth, and he's like really, he has those qualities a lot in his movies, and they always work very well. He was, obviously there's like Lantana, but then there's stuff like, my favorite performance of his ever has to be Empire Records, obviously. But he keeps that here, and just really is in a place, this is just really where his best work comes in, when he has this middle ground between sternness and warmth, and that's pretty much how we feel throughout the movie. And even when he seems like a tad sinister, like when he just kind of awkwardly stands in the doorway watching the girls, there's nothing, we understand why the girls are startled by it, but we know that there's nothing particularly sinister about this guy, and I think he portrays that really well throughout the movie. But then there's also this friendship between Janice, was the main girl's name, and Linda, I think, was her friend. And that friendship between them really raises the stakes too, where Linda starts to see the changes happening with Janice, and the way they kind of, what one does is often based on what the other is doing, and how they have that connection. And they just have this really sweet friendship. They have this plan to get adopted together so they can be sisters, and it just really makes for nice character work, and it really raises the stakes, and you really care when just shit's getting crazy by the end. And you want them to be safe, and there's actually a genuine melancholy should that not be the case. But then there is, and there's also another scene that I was very happy with, because it kind of looked like it was going in the wrong direction, and that is the, I think I heard somewhere this was the teaser trailer scene. The moment when she's at the table doing the tea party, and she starts to contort. And the second she started to contort, it was like, oh my fuck, are you kidding? Are we really doing the contorting thing? You were doing so well. But in true fashion of this movie and the Conjuring world, it makes you think they're gonna do something real routine, and it's like, oh, we've seen this shit before, and then we realize we haven't seen this shit before. As it goes on, it goes past the contorting thing. So I was really happy with that scene and how it kind of played with expectations there. That was satisfying. And then I also just like, as I was talking about, I do like the direction. I especially like the way the lighting is used. Like I was talking about the opening scene, about how they find a middle ground between innocent and sinister. And then there's like just those images, like when the doll is in the back of a closet by itself, and there's just this light coming down on it. We don't know where the hell that light is coming from, but it's there just enough, just so the doll is all we can see with pitch blackness around it. I think that's really well done. I really liked that moment when, this was like right before the power went out, when she's being pushed in the wheelchair by this unseen person, and the way she looks up, this is a really freaky shot too. This is definitely one of those cases of when you don't show something, that just makes it all the more freaky. Especially since they show us without showing us. That moment when she turns around to see who the hell is pushing her, and we can see the person all the way up, except for their face, just because of how the sun happens to be coming down. And that one quick shot of that is like freaky as hell. And it's great. So yes, overall, not just the experience that was happening around me, I found the movie really satisfying, and that's not even, and like I said, it's not like you're comparing it to the first movie, so it's automatically going to be good. You're comparing it to The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, where it has competition, and where it could look bad in comparison, because The Conjuring, as I've said many times, is probably the best horror movie we've had in this decade. And that it's able to hold its own when you compare them to those, really says something. So I do think they probably go in chronological order as far as quality, but to say Annabelle Creation is third under The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, yeah, that's... Actually, The Conjuring 2 kind of suffers a bit from overlength, so maybe it's above... Maybe they're about the same. So, yeah, that's... So, yeah, this was one of those things that was a lot... A lot could have gone wrong, because it could have been... I know we kind of had this with Ouija Origin of Evil last year, but I still think I liked Ouija Origin of Evil, but I do think the goodness of it was maybe blown out of proportion because of just how shitty the first one was before it. But yeah, these prequels with period settings to shitty movies are working out so far. And it does make you very interested in, obviously they're setting up their little Conjuring cinematic universe here. And of course everybody was like, well, we got Annabelle, now we're getting that damn Nun movie. The number one, Valak is a very scary character. Like Annabelle in the first scene of The Conjuring didn't really do much for me, so obviously the spin-off didn't do anything for me either. Not just because it was shitty too, but the fact that we have a scary character like Valak, and the fact that we've seen what Annabelle Creation can do, and given the feedback, I'm going to assume they're going to try and go more in that direction. Now I am very curious to see how this universe goes down, and to see where we end up, so that'll be fun. And it's nice to kind of have this whole, because aren't they having like trouble getting another movie off the ground because of the Warrens or something. But if this is what we're gonna do in the meantime, this should be fun. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully, it doesn't let us down. But we're off to a good start again. This movie does. It's kind of like acting as the Wonder Woman here. It's the, hey, if we just do that, we might be okay. We might be able to do this after all. So, yes. All right. Our third movie is gonna be Girls Trip. Which is an opportunity that just fell into my lap that I wasn't completely sure about, even though the extremely positive reviews were surprising. So it's basically like, so are we just getting another Bridesmaids here? Like, is this exactly what it was? I think I've mentioned this before. I'm not the biggest fan of Bridesmaids, kind of at all, but there was still something here. I guess maybe because it was the cast, because you have, Queen Latifah, who's an Oscar nominee, and then you've got Jada Pinkett Smith, who can do right and can do wrong, and then there is Regina Hall, who is shown to be this amazing comedic talent. Particularly, obviously the movie theater scene scary movie is the stuff of legend at this point. And to watch, it's really funny to see Jada Pinkett Smith and Regina Hall in the same movie, since Regina Hall in that scene is doing a parody of Jada Pinkett Smith in Scream 2. So it's funny to see both versions of that character here in the same movie being like best friends. But yeah, it's your very, very basic plot, your very basic setup. There are four friends who were best friends, and they hung out and they partied, and then they all went their separate ways, and some of them became square, some of them still party, and something brings them together to go on a trip because they've got to do this whole... It has to do with Regina Hall's job, and then obviously she's like this motivational speaker, and then... Or no, she's supposed to be like the next Oprah. And then Queen Latifah's the gossip columnist, so these things may come together. And then Jada's just the mother character, and we've got this new girl who's the party girl. So, obviously, these contrasting personalities are going to come together, and raunchy hijinks will ensue. Because one of the big things playing up this movie was that it was an R-rated comedy for women, much like Bridesmaids or Bad Moms, stuff like that. And so when you look at it that way, it is definitely a lot better than it sounds. Because you just say the layout and you're like, oh, well, we've only seen this about 20,000 motherfucking times. What's one more round? At least the actresses are likable. Let's do this. But yeah, and once again, for the third time in a row now, this is a theme this week. One of the things that makes this movie succeed is the fact that despite what kind of jobs they have, or despite what backgrounds they're coming from, for the most part, these women feel like real people. They feel like real friends. There's one moment towards the beginning that really actually stuck out to me, to where I was like, that was realistic. Where it was when they meet in the airport, and it's like Jada and the party girl are the first ones to get there, so they're waiting on Queen Latifah and Regina Hall to get here. And Regina Hall walks up behind him, and she's got this premeditated line, like, hey, could you guys point me in the direction, just pretending she's like a stranger or something? And generally in movies, it's a line that was written, it's supposed to be clever or something, so the character's going to say that whole line, and then the girls are going to react to her, and they're like, oh, I haven't seen you so long. but it felt like genuinely realistic that she had this whole premeditated line that's like, ooh, I'm gonna go up there and do this and pretend we're strangers and all that. And she gets right up to, hey, could you guys... And they're already freaking out. She didn't even get to finish her premeditated line. So just that little moment in there, I was like, oh, they feel like real people already. That's a good start. And yeah, that does kind of continue throughout the movie. There is the moment where, once again, it's a very... We've seen it a billion times, the moment when they get to the hotel. Obviously, there's a problem with the really nice hotel, so they have to go to the shitty hotel. There, they say, like, I'm pretty sure there was a chalk outline here. You know, I'm pretty sure, you know, something's dead in here, somebody shit in here, etc. But it's like, they walk in there and they're saying these things, and it's like, I have walked into a hotel before and said these things. And it's like, yeah, these people just kind of keep becoming... I mean, you could say it's... The cliche is why it feels familiar. Maybe that's true too, but they make it work. Like, the deliveries are on point, and the way the scenes kind of flow from one to the other works. And obviously, they do some stuff to kind of go into, because, to put it bluntly, you know, it's an all-black cast, at least our major players here. So, one of your concerns might be, is it going to be a bunch of stereotyping? And they actually kind of try to nip that in the bud very quickly, because Regina Hall is talking and she's saying, you know, like, by the way, we're going to, like, ban anything that's in the Urban Dictionary. We're not going to say, when her agent or whoever is trying to be hip or whatever, she says, like, preach, girl, and she just kind of, like, groans at it. And then there is the whole, like, she bans the phrase, bye, Felicia. But the thing here is that they do this and they set this up, but then this character, Dina, the party girl, comes in. And maybe this is the joke, but the whole idea is that Regina Hall sets up, like, stereotypes are out. And we're gonna get, you know, comedic lines in better ways, and funnier ways, more effective ways. And then Dina basically comes in and contradicts this whole thing. And maybe, like, that's the whole thing, but that's the problem, is that because of this, the Dina character is basically one joke the whole movie that just keeps going through the whole runtime. It is occasionally funny, but for the most part it just feels like she's a very downgraded, more annoying version of Melissa McCarthy in Bridesmaids, as well as Thomas Hayden Church in Sideways. But it's like, the aspects of those characters that were really, you know, going for it, like when McCarthy would just go off on a tangent in Bridesmaids, or all the raunchy dialogue from Church and Sideways, it's like they were all put into one character and just dragged the fuck out. But like with Church, there's obviously multiple facets to his character, and in McCarthy's case, the reason she got an Oscar nomination for Bridesmaids is because the way this character was just really, really worked for people, especially since that's just what she was. And this Dina character just feels like just such a low-rant version of that stuff, and all the jokes just kind of keep falling. She's just way too much, really. It's like she saw McCarthy's performance and was like, I could do that, but bigger. And it's like, you see Melissa McCarthy's performance in Bridesmaids, and you're like, that performance does not need to be bigger. Like, that is the last thing that performance needs to be. But that's what they decided to do with this character. And I'm sure it's not just the actress, I'm sure it's the writing as well. Like I said, that's not to say that there are not funny moments. There certainly are. But, I mean, for the most part, I got very tired of the character very fast. Which wasn't too excruciating, because the other three, I was good to go with. I think the MVP for me was probably Jada. I really liked the way she was able to do the, like, once again, her character's kind of a one-joke idea too, where she's she's cute throughout the movie, but she's trying to be sexy and can't pull it off. But she does find different ways to do that and approach that material that just makes the character really likable. Like, every time she was on screen, I was just happy to see the character. I really thought the way she did that was... And of course Regina Hall is Very good too. Regina Hall's speech at the end is a very good scene for her, a very well acted scene that really brings the sincerity of the movie forward. Because this is one of those movies. One of the things I really like that this movie does is the way that it felt like it could have gone. I was talking about the whole setup, and some of the characters feel like stuff that's been recycled and recycled and recycled. But there are definitely moments in this movie where there's what seems to be a very obvious setup, but they are able to take it in another direction. A couple that really stand out are the moment when, obviously, Queen Latifah's character works for the gossip column, and Regina Hall's character is very famous and very beloved and known for her healthy marriage, and she gets a picture, an incriminating paparazzi picture of Regina Hall's husband with an Instagram model, and the scenario sets it up the way we know it would always go. It's the three girls know her husband's cheating and they know about this picture and she doesn't. It's like, oh no, we don't tell her. We don't tell her at all. And it's like, okay, the scene's gonna come where late in the movie it's gonna be like, you mean you guys knew and you didn't tell me? And then they break up and we have to wait for them to get back together. But no, it just cuts right off. It's like, so, oh, by the way, that picture exists. And she's like, I know, it's been going on. And it's like, they just stop it. They just stop that whole thread that a shittier script, and scripts that are still getting made today, would have just let run in that whole direction we knew it was going. Just lazy as fuck, just let it go, and just let it play out exactly like that. And this movie was like, nope, we're cutting it off right here, and we're going to do something else with that. And I really like that stuff. Another time that they do that is towards the end, when Regina Hall's character makes a very clearly poor decision. And you've probably seen it watching these videos. When there are movies that do this, where Regina Hall's character would come to this decision that we know is a terrible decision, but in another movie that would be where it ends, and we just have to live with that. And there was, I think just recently, I won't say for spoiler's sake, but I'm pretty sure I saw a movie recently where this was pretty much how it went. And it was like, that's how it ends? Like, we're supposed to think that's a happy ending? And this movie doesn't take that route. This movie knows it's a bad decision and immediately makes the characters call her out on it. And that's where our conflict comes in. And generally it's like, oh, this is the scene where they break up. But the conflict is in such a place to where it's like, it was inevitably going to get to that. And the way they do the cliched scenes, like I said, the ending, when it's supposed to be this big, like these movies that want to be really raunchy and then have a message at the end are always like, fuck off. You are not fooling anybody. Just don't even try, because you're not pulling it off. This movie does have like a real heart in it, and this scene, like I said, Regina Hall's big scene at the end just really gives this movie a sincerity that just really sticks out in movies like this, where it actually feels genuine and warranted that we get to this point. And there is stuff also, like, there's going to be some very over-the-top jokes, like the pissing thing. To their credit, they set up the piss joke. They did. They set up the whole "but I'm not wearing underwear" thing. But of course, as this movie goes on, this is the downside. Like you see the 2.5 at the bottom, you're like, this sounds like 3 because you're really praising it. The problem here is that it seems like every time this movie's on the right path and does do something very right, or something that it may not be necessarily hilarious, but we can admit structurally works, like the piss joke, they're always without fail going to bring Dina in to do the joke again 10 times more over the top right afterwards. Because what do you do with funny jokes? Let's try again, only bigger. That'll get the huge laughs. And normally that probably does work, particularly on the target audiences of your movie, depending on who those are. But it was really like, just as I was thinking, like, okay, this joke works, even if I think the piss thing is it's a bit easy to go for the gross out. But then they bring Dina in to take it a step further, and that's when it's like, well, nah, you had something, but you don't anymore. It's like you just let the scene be and it'll be fine. You don't have to have Dana coming in and trying to upstage Melissa McCarthy in every scene, but the movie tries, and that's mainly where the big setback is this character. Then there are big moments too. There are moments that are go in very obvious directions, like the Mike Epps scene where he gives her absinthe, and we know where that's gonna go. And even though it's painfully obvious and it feels like we've seen scenes like this before, this still brings out some really funny moments in it. And there's even stuff like there is a scene in this movie that has been the absolute low point, the absolute complete and final death nail in really bad comedies. Yeah, this movie has a dance battle in it. But the thing about that is it does it in a way I seriously cannot believe I'm about to fucking defend a dance battle scene in a 2017 comedy, but this dance battle scene is actually incredibly energetic. Like, it really, like, when you see scenes like that in other movies, it's like, oh my god, this movie just has fucking white chicks. I'm looking at you, not to even mention those fucking Freebird and Seltzer movies, but it's like, when you're watching that, you're just like, really, you've reached this much of a total and complete dead end, that you're just gonna have fucking breakdancing or whatever the fuck right in the middle of the movie to popular songs, just to kill and waste time. But here, it was like this moment in the movie where it's just got a huge energy boost. And the characters just like really broke out of themselves, and it's this whole thing, and it's like, well, holy shit, they kind of made this work. I don't believe it. And then obviously there is stuff like that, but there is this, and there's also like there's like constant celebrity references. I like the dig at A-Rod. And then there's performances by, like, you know, Sean Combs and Common and stuff like that. Musicians who I'm probably too old or disinterested to recognize. But yeah, it is brought down a lot by this Dina character, and that a lot of it does feel very recycled, but when it hits, it hits good. And there are those moments where the constant attempts at vulgarity, a lot of them feel like they're trying a bit hard to reach that, you know, Bridesmaids level. Of course, I thought Bridesmaids was trying a bit too hard on the vulgarity thing, too, because that was the post-Hangover thing. There's always the, let's see if we can top the movie that came before thing, and it's just, the chain just continues with this. And there are times, certainly, where they make it work. I would say, confidently, looking back in history, say in 15 or 20 years or so, or maybe 2 years, I don't know, this will probably be the Citizen Kane of women party movies, if you will. It's even, like, it's not even necessarily like a party, it's not like Female Project X or anything, but I mean, it's got enough of that material in it where you get where it could pretty much be in that genre, the Bad Moms genre. But yeah, they do make a lot of it work, even though some of it is falling behind. One thing that did stand out in a weird way, going off all of this, is it kind of looked like this movie had a bit of a sloppy post-production, which was a bit weird. So it's like they had a little too much fun making it, and they kind of forgot about the whole technical aspects. It does have, like, usually comedies tend to be known for how bland they look. This movie has a noticeable bright aesthetic to it, which is nice, but then you look at stuff like, there's like really noticeable continuity errors throughout it, and there are a couple of moments where like somebody's talking like from the side and it's so clear that their mouth doesn't match. It was weird to me how noticeable stuff like that was throughout the movie, but yeah, it's fine. If it's something you don't think you would like, it's probably better than you're thinking it is. Otherwise, you're probably just pretty much getting what you think it is. All the way down to many scenes that probably, you know, feel familiar. But the way it just kind of flows from moment to moment works well, because it's long. It's over 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 5 minutes or something, which is very long for a movie like this. But like I said, the way they kind of play out, the way the conflict plays out feels genuine enough and feels natural enough to where that's okay. So yeah, overall I'm fine with it. But there were some things I'd probably change, but it's fine. Our next movie we're going into DVD territory now. Our first movie in DVD lane is going to be Snatched, the Amy Schumer movie with the long-awaited return of Goldie Hawn, who I believe this is her first movie since the Banger Sisters. And speaking of the Banger Sisters, we'll go to Susan Sarandon and back to Melissa McCarthy. Obviously, when I heard that Goldie Hawn's big return was going to be a comedy playing the mom of Amy Schumer, my first thought was, oh, fuck. Is this Tammy again? The movie with McCarthy and Sarandon when they just went on a road trip and they were mother and daughter and they were kind of estranged, but then they sorted out their differences and funny shit happened and they made fools of themselves, and it's like, oh, shit. This is exactly what this is setting up to be. It's not quite that. Schumer and I'm probably gonna accidentally call her Bowler a few times. Just anticipate that. Schumer and Hahn have much better chemistry than McCarthy and Sarandon did. And the thing here is, I know this movie kind of gets sneered at because I know Amy Schumer is not particularly a well-liked personality in a lot of circles. I know there's like the whole comedy stealing thing, and just in general, people don't like her approach or the fact that her material is redundant, which I can get. I haven't really seen anything from her outside of the movies I've seen her in. Like I didn't like Trainwreck, and that's pretty much the only vibe I had of her apart from what I had just heard around. So I just went ahead and I thought she was fine in this. Like I thought she was perfectly. She's not particularly a likable character, but I kind of liked what she brought to the table. Just the kind of I don't know. Like it's a character that's set up to be disliked, but there was something about the way she performs, I guess, that just kind of drew me to her, and I was like, okay, I can watch a movie with this person, because I was worried because of all that negative stuff I'd heard. But it's like, she's fine. At least in this context, she's fine. And of course, Goldie Hawn, you would never... I mean, I don't think her deliveries seem a little behind, like a little slower than they should be, but for the most part, it's like, you wouldn't suspect this is somebody that hasn't been on screen for 15 years. So she had a shitload of experience. She's had an Oscar since 1969. That's a lot of experience. And so throughout this movie, this is where the movie's strong point is just these two dealing with each other. And there are funny lines, there are funny situations, and just little like the whole... And it's not a movie I feel like suffers from Apatow syndrome. Like every now and then it might seem like they're throwing a line here and there out there, but it isn't one of those movies... I was so thankful to see it. Didn't feel like one of those movies where they were just constantly trying to improv and just desperately trying to be funny. Everything felt like it had been mapped out before the scene started, which is much more... In this post-Apatow age, that's usually for the better, because everybody wants to do the constant improv thing now, and it makes comedies a fucking mess these days, and just embarrassing. It's like they leave all the good and the bad takes in the same movie, and it just comes off all misguided. But here, it felt like they didn't really do that. It felt like they had one line per scene that they were going to stick with. And whether the line is good or not, I like that they were able to have that kind of discipline in the editing room. So, and like I said, with comedies the way they are this day and age, that's admirable. And then you've got, a lot of people showing up. You've got Randall Park has a funny scene as her boyfriend in the opening scene that dumps her. A dude that I love is Ike Barinholtz. I'm not sure how I felt about him in this. Like, he does what he can, but the problem with this character is that every time he's on screen, the movie feels unfocused. And it feels like this is where we need to be. Schumer and Hahn together. That's where this movie needs to stay if it's going to succeed. And we keep branching off on this Ike Barinholtz thing. I get that we know that people from home have to be looking for them because the movie's about them being kidnapped and in a foreign country. But still, it just kind of felt like it's very short. It like just reaches an hour and a half, so it's almost like they needed padding. Like they didn't have enough, so they kind of added more and more of these Ike Barinholtz scenes, much more than they needed. And I think the setup of the whole scenario is kind of like the whole setup to the joke is the redundancy is what makes it funny because the repetitiveness of it. But it just even with somebody as funny as Ike Barinholtz, it just didn't feel. It just felt like the movie kept losing track whenever we go back to that, and it does it a lot. So we have that, but then we also have stuff like stuff that kind of tries to elevate when this movie's gone off the deep end, like the Christopher Maloney scenes, where he's like this, dude that's this wannabe Indiana Jones who may or may not just be some psychopath with a death wish that they have to follow into the jungle. And speaking of that, something struck me after I watched this movie. It was the fact that the really interesting thing about this movie is that it was reminding me a little bit of Hot Pursuit, the kind of fun, overhated Reese Witherspoon, Sofia Vergara movie from a couple years ago. And where it kind of has like that same similar chemistry, and it's two women who are in over their heads and get into wacky antics and all that shit. But there's also Hot Pursuit with John Cusack, which is like 1984 or something, when he's like out there and he's getting involved with, criminals and all that. And it struck me, the weird thing about Snatched is that Snatched is basically a combination of both movies named Hot Pursuit. I don't think that was on purpose, but it just seems like a really weird thing. The way the movie is put together is a bit questionable. There's a moment at the beginning when there is a humorous joke at a clothing store when she's giving her whole background to some person. In this weird approach, it's like the scene is with a handheld camera, and I don't know what that's supposed to. And I get the whole idea of, like I was just saying, comedies look bland typically, like it's always just one camera just sitting and so on, and there's no kind of flash to it. I don't know if the handheld approach was supposed to try and fix that, like if Levine thought it was going to be too basic looking unless they did something, and that was his idea. I don't know. Levine I refer to obviously as Jonathan Levine, the director, who did 50-50 and The Night Before and Warm Bodies. He also did that All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, which was just a terrible horror movie. And now he's done this, and it's a weird career, but it's like in moments like that where it's just like, is it like an artsy director trying to come through here or something? Does he realize what movie this is? So it's like, not to say that you shouldn't try, but I mean, there are just some things that don't fit movies. And this is a movie that really didn't need. This movie has just a lot of stuff it doesn't need. That's its problem. The stuff when it might sound a little bland or like something we've seen a lot before, but honestly, the thing that I look at here is I talk about the high points of this movie are just the Schumer and Hahn scenes and the back and forth and all that stuff. Really, this movie's plot is what gets in the way. When it basically tries to be some action-adventure movie is when this movie starts to really fall off the rails. Especially in like the last 20 minutes or so, they just try to go full on into it, and that's not to say there isn't funny moments, like the characters played by Wanda Sykes and Joan Cusack. Joan Cusack playing a silent character because she cut her tongue out. That the moment when they're on the truck and it drives away it's funny. Like I don't think this movie was very well received, but there is some undeniably funny shit in it for sure. And that's mainly just, you know, the delivery and just the back and forth between them. It's really when the movie tries to be what it ultimately ends up being, to where it's like, you know, you probably just could have... These two characters could have stayed home. Just didn't leave the house, and you'd probably have a better movie. I don't know what that says, but that's what I thought anyway, at least looking at, comparing what we saw in the beginning and then where we were by the end. It's very clear where the good stuff was, and they went in the wrong direction, as you can tell. And then there's just stuff that gets way out of hand, like the tapeworm thing. That... we didn't need that scene. But then there's some stuff. There's something that actually didn't occur to me until, like, I think the next day after I saw it, which was, one thing I really liked that this movie avoided was a romance subplot. Because I was talking about how this movie's problem is that it's doing all these kinds of things that it shouldn't be doing instead of focusing on the stuff that they're doing right. And usually, when you say that, one of the big culprits in this is an unneeded love story. And this movie doesn't have that. It kind of starts up with it until we realize that's just to set off the plot, and the dude is untrustworthy. From then on, the love story is the mother and daughter, and I thought that was a really nice way to commit to the concept itself, even if they didn't stick to it the way they should have. So, yeah, I really, like, it pains me because I feel like there was a good, hilarious, entertaining movie here, but about 25 minutes to half an hour in, it has, and then it loses it pretty much for good. So that's a real shame, because I feel like these two really do go well together. I know saying an experienced Oscar-winning actress goes well with Amy Schumer makes the internet angry. I know. But, yeah, that's the stuff that worked, and it did work. But the rest of the movie didn't want to follow suit, so we have what we have. Our next movie is going to be The Wall, which is I was not expecting this movie to be what it was. I knew it was a war movie starring Aaron Taylor Johnson and John Cena that was directed by Doug Liman. And it made me wonder why I hadn't heard of the movie before I had heard of it, which was not long before it was out on DVD. And when it opens, it starts off like it's going to be like The Hurt Locker, like the scene when Anthony Mackie has to not move as, you know, the hours pass, and it gets real intense and stuff, and it's like, okay, we're starting off with that, and it's Cena with the gun, and Aaron Taylor Johnson's looking out for him. And then once that scene's over, it's like, oh, well, they did that Hurt Locker scene decently. Not as well as Bigelow did, but a nice, good opening. And it really set these characters up well, too. And they have a nice back and forth. Cena talking about Schumer going right into Cena. As Cena has shown us in comedies, he can have a really nice presence. He's kind of like he's not on Dwayne Johnson levels, but that's kind of how Dwayne Johnson showed us, if you take the Scorpion King out of the equation, please. Comedies are an interesting place to start for these wrestlers, and Cena has really shown kind of a transition here, where we had the Marine, obviously, which might as well have been a comedy, and I mean that in a good way, actually. That I have the Marine like right over there, and I'm proud of it. So, and you think, okay, this is a nice banner between them. What's going to happen? At this point, I did not know that they're the only two characters in the movie. The whole movie, it's the two of them and a voice. This movie is phone booth in a war setting. I did not know that. And it was very interesting to kind of witness myself figure that out. And if you can commit to that, if you can get into that, then that basically is where your opinion of this movie is going to lie. But the thing is that the setup isn't exactly flawless. Because it's a nice scene, it's an intense moment when they feel like there's a sniper out there, and they've heard about this mythological sniper that's out there that's killed like 30 other guys or something single-handedly, and like nobody sees him ever. And so they're talking about the possibility of that, but they're like, no, it's fine, we're going out there. So Cena goes to check on these bodies and gets his ass gunned down. Not fatally, but he's out there. and Aaron Taylor Johnson's back here covering. And it's like, okay, well, Cena is flailing around a lot. Like, Cena is making it known that he's still alive. Why is he not being shot right now? I assume because so he can be important later. Because he's like right there in the damn movie. But it's still, he brings an intense quality to it with his performance. That whole, the moment where we sense we see just the vastness. Like, the place, the one place, I talked about this with Desierto. It's like, the one place you don't want to be when a sniper is after you is in the middle of the fucking desert. Because there's nowhere to go. And Cena really brings that forth when he's like, he has that panic in his voice, that genuine panic, and he's laying there, and he's like, I don't know what to fucking do, man. Like, if I move, I'm fucking dead. But it just kind of kept occurring to me, it's like, he could probably still shoot you, dude. You're like right there. That camouflage is not that camouflage. Especially since you keep moving and talking. So you kind of have to get through stuff like that, and then there's the whole, once he's been shot, Aaron Johnson, like, runs out there. And he starts to get shot at. And it's like, okay, I think I get the whole loyalty to Cena thing, why you'd run out there, but the thing is it's like, what did you expect? Did you expect to not get shot at when you ran out there? And and there's stuff like that throughout the movie. If that kind of stuff bothers you, you're not going to get through this movie. Kind of like, it's one of those cases where you just have to commit to it, otherwise you're not going to have a good time going to another sniper movie with grand piano. Like, obviously I loved grand piano, but it's like, that's a concept you gotta get used to real fast if you're gonna have any fun. Like, if the lack of realism here is gonna bother you, you should probably move on. And the thing here, though, the thing that does make it work for when it does is Aaron Taylor Johnson here is able to, it is crazy to me when I see movies like Nocturnal Animals and now this, even Kick-Ass too, T-O-O and T-W-O, it's insane. It is insane that this guy is not American. Because this guy plays a better American than a lot of American actors. And this guy feels so much like, once again, he feels like a real person. Like, his frustration and his anger and his fear, they feel real throughout the movie. The guy is a really damn good actor. He's another one of those ones where it's like, if you kind of questioned it before, the dude, like, in stuff like, you know, Albert Nobbs or something, where he can be very, he got a lot of, you know, flack for Godzilla just being kind of a blank slate. When the guy has to perform, oh my god, he can really, really do it. And I think he proved that point with Nocturnal Animals. Like, even if you didn't like him in that movie, unlike, say, his performance in Godzilla, you can see that the dude does have life in him that can just burst out. And the way he has to play this constant frantic character, much like Colin Farrell did in Phone Booth, he very much pulls it off. And obviously the movie descends and turns into less of a war movie and a sniper movie and more into, like, the whole, it tries to go the psychological route. And this is the point that the movie should be getting very interesting. Because obviously Phone Booth is a fantastic movie, and that's because watching this disembodied Kiefer Sutherland voice just getting in Colin Farrell's head and just really messing up his world and without him leaving the spot. And that movie has, like, so many great moments in it and really, really builds the suspense and has some big, big payoff moments in it. Here, those moments rarely come, and when they do, we kind of seen them all before. It's going to be one of those movies where, because we're in, I know usually this is something to praise, and something that if another movie wouldn't do it, you'd probably get on its case for not doing it. But it's just become such a cliche at this point, and it makes you realize the direction every movie is going now. Like, if this was a short, it might work better, but obviously, eventually, you're going to run out of things to do, and what do you do when you run out of things to do, when your movie is going to be all dialogue, with just characters in one place? You start whipping out the backstories. And it's like, yeah, this is the part where we really get to know the characters, we get to know their ins and outs, we get to know what motivates them, where their emotions are coming from, all that stuff. And it's like a toned down moment in an otherwise frantic atmosphere, but it's like, we've done this so many times now. It's usually the point to where, like I said, movies get panned if they don't do this. But it's like I don't know what other dialogue to give you, so I'm going to give you my backstory thing to make my character stronger. If it's not done well or feel like it's just running the motions, it's going to get tired. And it's like, maybe this movie could have taken its dialogue in another direction. I'm not sure what, but it's not my job to think of that as a spectator, it's the writers. And and the thing is, it's just like, I feel like these guys could have had much more of a back and forth, apart from just saying, I'll bet your backstory's this, and he eventually says, well, my backstory's this. And then they just kind of have that back and forth where it's like it just feels tired. That's the movie's problem. And like, it's a really interesting setup, but it could have been a lot more than it was. It could have been a lot more interesting, could have been a lot more thrilling, could have been a lot more intense, engaging, engrossing, whatever. But it just is. Like, if I tell you the setup, you probably know every beat. And that's that's not even to go into the fact that I may be saying too much here, but this movie is one of those movies that has the fuck you ending. That, I don't know. This kind of ending has worked in other movies before. You could say this about everything in this movie. It's worked in other movies before. This one, I think, saw those other movies and was like, we can do that too. But they just don't pull it off the same way, and it feels like a fucking waste of time. And from a director as capable as fucking Doug Liman, this feels like a misfire. When you look at the Bourne Identity and Edge of Tomorrow, you don't even have to look at action. Look at the fact that this guy made fucking Go and Swingers, and it's like, in this, it just doesn't have that flair that we know Liman has, and this is what that needed. This if this was, like, what would be really funny is if I didn't know that Doug Liman was the director of this, I could see myself saying, man, if somebody like Doug Liman had directed this, it'd be off the chain. But it's like, with Doug Liman's name on it, it's still just like, well, no, we know this movie. We know this movie up and down. And like I said, it's really just all the way up to, and then not only does the fuck you ending just kind of give up on it, but it's also like, there's moments like when he's talking to Cena, and he's talking to the dude, and it's like the dude can hear what he's saying, where it's like he's talking, and he's like, what are you saying? Who are you talking to? But then there's other times where he's like screaming stuff, like saying to Cena, hey, dude, I think I know where the sniper is. It's like the movie's, maybe I missed something, but it felt like the movie was selective to when the sniper could hear him and when he couldn't. And it was like, depending on how it's going to affect the scene is how we're going to base whether or not the sniper can hear what he says. And it just felt like after a while the movie got to a point to where it was just giving up and really wanted to get to an ending soon. So that kind of sucked. And then there was the whole, like, there's more of those moments, like I was talking about at the beginning, stuff like when Aaron Johnson actually comes out from, like, his cover, and he's clearly there, and we see him through the sniper scope. But then once Aaron Johnson's in more of a place where he's covered up, then he starts getting shot at. And it's like, does this motherfucker know he had the perfect shot 30 seconds ago because I saw it with my own eyes through his own goddamn scope? And so you could say it's one of those psychological things where it's like, oh, he's just messing with him. He might actually say that at one point, but it's like, no, it just feels like the movie can't make up its mind. It doesn't remember where it was in the movie 5 minutes before the scene we're currently on. And it just all leaves the movie kind of poorly when it had, like, a lot going for it. Like, it really had an interesting concept. Like I said, we've seen it before, but it really could have worked again. Especially with Aaron Taylor Johnson as this character that I really bought. But that is what it is. Our next movie is going to be Diary of a Wimpy Kid: The Long Haul. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I really, really like those Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies. I saw all 3 of them in theaters. I saw Dog Days like 3 times. Because I think one day I was going to see The Dark Knight Rises and I had time to kill, so I just saw Dog Days again. And then I saw it a 3rd time with my brother. And I never got tired of it. I just love those movies. They're so fun and cheerful. It's like it does what movies like this should do. It almost feels like when I watch these movies, it takes me back to when you read these books. Like, I never read specifically the Diary of Wimpy Kid books, but many books like it, and I feel like I'm reading those books as a kid again when I watch the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, and it just feels great. So I was happy to hear that they had made another one, despite the fact that 1, 2, and 3 were consecutive, 2010, 2011, 2012, and now we have a 5-year jump with an all-new cast. Obviously, with the 5-year jump, you have no choice but to recast, because you have the same characters. And I feel like it was going to be weaker, and obviously Steve Zahn and Rachel Harris were perfect as the parents. Now we have Tom Everett Scott and Alicia Silverstone. Tom Everett Scott, I was like, fine. I miss Steve Zahn, but fine. If you had to go with another That Thing You Do cast member, okay, good for you. Alicia Silverstone, the last thing I saw her in was King Cobra, which she was just dreadful in. She is terrible in King Cobra. But before King Cobra, I was like, where the hell has she been? Well, now she's here filling in for Rachel Harris, and it's almost like the fact that the mom is such a square. It's kind of like, are they intentionally doing like an anti-Clueless thing here? Like, is it supposed to be funny that she's the uptight mom because of Clueless? Because it's like, well, she was once this and now she's this, the total opposite. I don't know. Or maybe she just needed a job. And then I thought Greg was perfectly cast in the other movies, and Devin Bostick as Roderick is just gold. Just absolute gold, that kid is. So it was gonna be, I was very troubled that we were gonna see Roderick on screen, not played by Devin Bostick. I was worried. Is it not weird how invested I am in these Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies? So this kid comes on, and immediately I think of Kevin Kachadorian. Not even Ezra Miller playing Kevin Kachadorian, just specifically Kevin Kachadorian came to mind when I saw this kid, and I was like, oh, that doesn't make me laugh, that makes me terrified. But as the movie went on, he did really start to take on the role of Roderick, and it almost felt like Devin Bostick had not left. And once it kicked off and I got used to the newness of the characters looking new, and the fact that this one wasn't so much... What I really like about those movies, too, is just how they're just nothing more than a series of events. And that's really all it is. It's like... Yeah, it's just like... That's all it needs to be. The movie does not need to do anything else. Every now and then there's like threads that tie together, but for the most part it just goes from one thing to the other, and that's just how those movies work. It feels like you're reading a series of short stories. Short, very comedic, very funny stories. And that's more... This movie does kind of capture that, but it kind of has a whole... There is like a whole point. There's like something we're reaching for, and it's kind of like... So that kind of takes away from the feel that those other movies had that was so appealing, to know that we have a destination eventually we're going to get to. And so... But once I got used to all this, I was fine. I started to feel about it about as well. I didn't find this one as endearing as the others, but I was able to get comfortable with it enough that it felt enough like those other ones. And the thing here is that there are more moments in this one for sure that don't land than there were missed jokes in the other movies, at least that I remember. Like they do add stuff like for this more modern, like things that are a bit more in the media now than they were in 2012, like those gaming streamers. I really like the digs that this movie takes at them, and basically does a parody of them. What's really funny about that, though, is this character in the movie that plays the streamer that Greg is obsessed with, where it's like, you could take it as parody or an accurate portrayal. Both work. That's what makes it really funny as well. And it does have some good jokes in it, some good setups. Like the confession game is a nice gag, and Obviously, Roderick has that continuous joke, the getting his van fixed. That's all he fucking thinks about is getting his van fixed. And every time he says that, it gets funnier. Because of the repetition just works in just the right moments. And they always wait for just that right moment to have Roderick say, yeah, maybe I can get my van fixed. It sounds... If you don't know the context, or you don't know the sense of humor in the other movies, this probably sounds odd. You're probably thinking, if you hear me describe it, but you don't have any context, how could that possibly be funny? It's all about the context. So, just take my word for it. Because I know these movies don't work on everybody, but they've always worked for me. And the thing that I do think really works here is a real strong point of this movie that's always been something that's stuck through the movies is the relationship between Greg and Roderick as brothers. Because in the other movies, he spends most of his time with Rowley, who's barely in this. And so this one is, they really get those brothers. It's a road trip movie, obviously, so they're going to have those moments where they're stuck together for most of the movie, and they have to have those brotherly moments where obviously they get on their nerves, and there are moments where you could swear they just flat out don't like each other. But then there are other moments when it's like, and it's just like brothers are, where there's really no transition. There's no, we're going to be one thing towards each other, then another. It's just always back and forth. 1 minute, they hate each other. 5 minutes later, they're partners in crime. And it's just a back and forth with them. And they have those moments when they have that, like, not just that brotherhood, but that partnership, where they have an objective that they're going to go into together. And they just have this real brotherly vibe to them that is just as apparent when they're fighting with each other or they hate each other. And it's just a great representation of brothers, these characters. Like I said, not just in this movie, but all the way through. And so that's something I've really appreciated about these movies, the way they portray that. There's some interesting stuff in here. There are a few movies this movie seems to evoke, whether it's intentional or not. There's one that's very much the Dumb and Dumber bottle pissing scene, where they just pretty much straight lift that. Like, I don't even think it's supposed to be a reference. I think it's just supposed to be a gag in the movie. It just so happens they completely lifted it from Dumb and Dumber because they ran out of ideas. But then there is stuff that's clearly direct references, like Psycho. When he's in the shower and we see the shadow, and I was like, oh, they're doing like a Psycho thing here. And I was like, I wonder if they're going to go all the way. And it's really funny. Like I said, it might sound like I've gotten mad at Seth MacFarlane for this before. Like the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles scene in Ted 2, I thought was just a weird idea, because it's like, why just recreate an entire scene? Especially when you're a comedy, recreating another comedy. What is the point? But you have a Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie recreating Psycho. And when I say recreating, not only does the figure come up to the curtain while Greg's there, but then the curtain opens and Greg screams and the guy's reaching for him, kind of like Norman Bates stabbing. But it's like they play the music and it's the exact same shots. Like, it's the 3-part zoom in on Greg. It's the shots of like the up and then the really quick cutting, and then his shoes are muddy. That's why he's in the shower. So like when the blood is going down the drain, it does that. Only it's the mud on his shoes, and it was just so weird. It's like they completely recreated the shower kill shot by shot in a Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie, and just. When you do that, like I said, it just seems weird to lift a scene entirely, but when you have this contrast and context, it's like, that's what makes it so funny, is that it's an exact replica of the scene, that they paid that much attention to get the exact shots right, but kept it in the context of their own scene. It's just really, really funny. But then there's stuff like, the moment when they're trying to get their car up the hill and they have to do the jumping in one at a time as they push, and it's like, is that an intentional reference to Little Miss Sunshine? It almost feels like there had to have been somebody like behind the scenes saying, we need an homage to Little Miss Sunshine. That's a road trip movie that's beloved and has the same kind of family message in it. Why not? Well, I don't know about the same message, but you get what I mean. So there's stuff like that. And there is stuff in here that I don't care for. Like, the whole... Even though I love the Psycho scene, the Beardo thing in general I thought was a little weird. I like the initial scene. Where they when his kids convince him that Greg is the one that fucked everything up, and he goes after him for it. But it's the whole thing of... This is like my most hated road trip movie cliche, and you all know this if you've seen a road trip movie, and that is... when they're on the road trip and they run into a character and whether they get in trouble or whatever it is, they're always going to run into that character again. And this Beardo family keeps showing up throughout the movie, pretty much in the exact moments we think they'll show up again. And that is so worn out in road trip comedies. And usually it's like one of the kids falling in love and seeing a girl in the other car or something. And sometimes it's stuff like that where you see, like... I did think it was kind of funny with Jeff Daniels' family and RV, even though that was like when the cliche reached its peak. I just think Jeff Daniels is fucking hilarious in that movie. Kristen Chenoweth too. But yeah, for the most part, I do think. I mean, obviously, it does have that bottom of the barrel humor. Like, there's the whole. Like, when you get past the real silliness and like pigs shitting and stuff like that. When it's just being like really frantic and stupid and just a kid's movie, I guess, even though that's what it is. Still, the stuff that I loved about the other movies is in here. It's just not as prominent and it's not as strong, and it doesn't, like, I remember a lot of the set pieces in the other movies. I probably won't so much for this. I'll probably remember the Psycho scene, and it's probably about the extent of it as far as individual scenes go, but, and yeah, the way they did stick with the Greg Roderick relationship I thought was really well done, so, yeah, it's, like I said, if you're into these, like the way I am, you should be fine, even if there's, like, a lot of changes, but I just have such a soft spot for these movies. I don't know where it comes from, but it's like, yeah, I just can't get enough of that stuff, so... Let's finally go on to our last and 7th movie, as my voice slowly wears out. This movie is How to Be a Latin Lover, a movie I only knew about because I saw it on Kristen Bell's IMDb page like a long time ago. It was one of those movies I was starting to wonder if it was ever going to exist, because it had been on her page for so long. And really the only reason I sought it out was because she was in it. There's a lot of people in it I didn't realize were in it, but... when I got it out of Redbox, the only thing I knew was that Kristen Bell was in it, and that was enough for me. But the thing here is that the star of it is that guy, the movie Instructions Not Included, which was that age-old comedy bit where the ladies' man type guy gets the small child, and he has to adapt. They have to adapt to each other's lives, and he has to become a father and learn his ways or whatever. And that movie was a big old damn hit. Even being a foreign language movie, it's just everybody, like, really took to that movie. So this guy was going to kind of break out, possibly into mainstream American movies. He was like, I think he's like, he originally started off as like a big TV personality or something. And it's like what Instructions Not Included was, 7 years ago? So it's like, here's your follow-up, only it's like basically an entirely American movie. Ken Marino is the director. So we're going to see a lot of familiar faces in it. And so the plot is very similar. There's the whole, he's the guy, he's got the sleazy lifestyle, he's basically he's a male gold digger. I don't even feel like I need to stress male. It's just usually in movies when you see gold digger characters, they're usually female. But yeah, this dude's a fucking gold digger. He meets old women, very rich women, and basically marries them because they aren't necessarily desirable to other people. Like he feels like he's gonna lead this man whore existence. It's gonna be amazing, and he ends up just married to one woman for like 25 years. Who just happens to be very rich and takes care of everything, and he gets to be a lazy asshole that basks in his richness and his womanizing ways. And naturally, he's going to get saddled with his sister's kid. His sister is Selma Hayek. Go figure. She's a major character. I didn't even know she was in it when I got it. And obviously she has a son that she's taking care of by herself because the dad died. And he hasn't been around ever, really. So they're just now getting to know each other, and obviously the kid's going to annoy him, and then he's going to befriend him, teach him his ways, he'll probably make him cry at some point, they'll get back together again. Happy ending. We all know this damn movie. So it's all about the way that it's handled, and with this guy in the lead role, he does it in a way to where it's like this guy is this sleazy, immature douche who all he cares about is getting rich. He doesn't care about women's feelings at all or anybody's feelings at all, except for him and maybe his best friend Rob Lowe. And Rob Lowe is the same way as well. They've adopted this style together. And so you would think, oh my god, how am I going to follow a 2-hour comedy with this guy as the main character? How am I ever going to grow to like this guy? Especially since, somewhat spoiler alert, he doesn't really learn the error of his ways. Like, he realizes what's right and what's wrong, but not a whole lot of change happens. And basically his plan is to befriend his little nephew here because his nephew has a crush on this girl, and this girl's grandmother is a very, very rich Raquel Welch. So he's like, I'm going to get to Raquel Welch by befriending my nephew who's going to befriend that girl. And it's like, this guy's a fucking scumbag. And the thing about it is, I guess that's the joke. Like, I guess that's where our comedy starts and not necessarily where it's supposed to stop. So that's how we get saddled with this character, who we're going to follow. And it's like, we don't necessarily want him to succeed, but the movie is not going to reach a climax until something happens with this. So we just gotta stick with it. And the thing about it is the way he plays this character in such a way that he's just such a failure, and the movie acknowledges so well that he's a failure, that it's not the kind of way, like, it doesn't build up right away that he's the kind of character we're supposed to like. We just kind of watch him do his thing, and we may gradually find ourselves there. So I thought they did that pretty well, because that was going to be a hard obstacle. That was their very first obstacle, and it was a huge one. And for the most part, they dodged it, but the rest of the movie, for starters, it's way too damn long. Like I said, it's about an hour 55. And it feels long. This is one of those movies where, in any other movie, about the point that it reaches an hour and a half in is where another movie would be ending. But they have to tack on. But that's where they put the conflict. The conflict where everybody gets mad, he makes the kid cry, etc. An hour and a half in. That's a problem. And it has a lot of endings too. Up to that point where we have to solve all this other stuff and get to the directions that we already know it's heading in. So that's a real bummer to have to put up with. But there is stuff in there that they're able to pull off as well. Usually, it's mostly in the characters. Like the kid. This is another one of those kids that he's supposed to be annoying and obviously the precocious type. But the thing here is that he annoys the main character. That's his purpose in life for the first half of the movie, is to annoy the main character so that the main character can hate him, but then ultimately love him. And they're able to make this kid to where we understand that he's annoying to the main character, but he's not annoying to we, the audience. So that was skillfully handled to make sure that didn't happen, because that's a very hard thing to pull off, is to make the kid character not annoying, especially when he's supposed to be annoying. But they made us not hate the kid, which is a big step in the right direction with this movie. So the fact that the main character is watchable despite his personality, and the kid is watchable, the movie's in a good place. But then it gets into a whole bunch of other shit. Obviously, I said there's going to be a lot of people in the movie. There's the Kristen Bell character, who is... I liked her, and, she was her normal, adorable Kristen Bell self. But as it went on, her character just kind of got weirder. I like the fact that she doesn't go in the direction we think she's going to go in when they first meet, but it's still... I don't. It just kind of seemed like a dead end thing after a while that we kept going back to when it was already kind of done. But then there's stuff like there's also a humorous Michael Cera scene, a couple of Michael Cera scenes that I thought was just a cameo, but he's like credited and everything. It would have been funnier if like there was no sign that he was in it. He just did what he does in the movie and was funny like that. Rob Corddry is Raquel Welch's driver who keeps popping in and out and is funny enough. The point in this movie where it just really, really fucks itself badly, not just the fact that it goes on and on and on, but this is one of the main reasons the movie goes on and on and on, and it's this subplot with Rob Riggle and Rob Hubel, where it starts off as a funny joke, where he needs some money, so he's going to do that thing where he goes to that place, and they're the guys that say, if you put this coating on your car that advertises shit, we're going to give you money. We're going to give you the money now, but if you take that coat off, we're going to get that money back. And he's like, okay. And then he just goes on. And then, obviously, some hike doesn't like the coating, so she takes it off. And the guys find out, and they track him down, and they're like, dude, you took the coating off! We're going to get our money back. And you're like, okay, that's a funny joke, that they're basically treating this whole thing like the mob or something. But this isn't a joke after a while, it's a subplot. That's a problem. That takes like one funny joke where you're like, that's pretty funny because they're blowing that out of proportion. And then it becomes like half of the movie. And then you're like, wow, what a terrible fucking idea. And it becomes very unfunny very fast. Rob Hubel is funny at the start. I like the bike running joke. But it becomes very tired and very not funny very fast after it's repeated itself a couple of times, and it does so like 5 more, and then it's just so run into the ground by that time, and it's like, it's bad news. But like the bike thing, there are a few scenes that stand out that are kind of funny, like, there's a thing that happens and then kind of happens again, where it's the character, obviously the whole joke of the movie is the character thinks he's smooth when he's not. And so they play that up for a couple of moments that obviously would go smoothly in other movies. And that reference point that we have is what makes it funny. Like the moment when he's on the golf course and he says like some final line to Rob Lowe and then he hits the ball and the ball misses the hole and he just turns and says, that would have been so much cooler if that went in. And that's funny. And then there's a moment later like that when he's going to do this dramatic thing where he grabs something and throws it out of a window, an open window. And the window is open, but he misses it. And it just bounces back into the room. And it's a funny moment when it happens because you've seen other movies, you expect everything to go smoothly, but for this guy that doesn't happen. It's funny. And the wheelchair bit is funny. But for the most part, that's the thing, is this movie has these moments that are funny, but the movie is just a full-on, flat-out comedy with these little dramatic family moments thrown here and there that we've seen in every movie ever. And the movie doesn't strive for particularly big laughs. It's almost like it gets comfortable with itself in just a neutral phase, which kind of brings about a bit of a laziness. And for a movie that's 2 hours, that would not be the way to go. If you're going to have a comedy this long, it needs to build. It needs to get big. It needs to be heading in a big direction. The laughs need to be bigger than they are. It's nice that they're there at times, but to just kind of almost be like you're just stuck in neutral mode for an entire 2 hours when your movie's a comedy, you're not really going to get anywhere. Like, it's going to be pleasant when you're watching it, but after a while, it's going to be like, what else do you have? You still have, like, over an hour left. What do you have to offer? Why are you going to justify us sitting here for another hour? And it doesn't really do that. It doesn't really get there. The message isn't strong enough. The dramatic moments are too cliche, and there's something in this movie, and I think people will like it if it's the kind of thing they'd be into, but obviously. But it's, yeah, it just kind of really falls short from something that could have been, like, genuinely likable, even with an unlikable character at its center, and it does find that vibe a little bit, but it never goes beyond really the starting point. So that's kind of where it falls short. So there we go. Oh God. Next week, I honestly have no idea what's coming. I may see just the Hitman's Bodyguard, which I'm missing this weekend. I know that Robert Pattinson movie is supposed to come. I don't know how wide that is, and other than that, I think there's like Leap. But I don't know that's. I don't know. We'll see. I just have no idea. We'll have to see what happens. Same thing goes for the next verses too. I just have no idea what next week is. So that's how I'm gonna leave you. I just don't fucking know. So hopefully these helped you out, or they were entertaining, or whatever the fuck you want them to be. So there that is, and yeah, I think we're done. So that's it.